We'll get started. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to our workshop today. Before we get started, I do want to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. So just a heads up on that. And you will be receiving a copy of the recording after this session, along with a copy of the presentation for your future reference. So we'll go ahead. Okay. All right. My name is Chris. I am a career coach. I work with an organization called Career Catchers here in Montgomery County. And we are partnered today with the Ignite Hub at Montgomery College to bring you this workshop on resume writing. So thank you all for being here today, both in person and on Zoom. Now, I do want this presentation to be interactive, so please feel free if you have any questions or comments or experiences you'd like to share. Please feel free to do so. If you're in person, feel free to raise your hand. If you're on Zoom, you can use the hand raise function or let my colleague Anthony here know in the chat, and we will address your questions. If you are on Zoom, you can also put your questions and comments in the chat as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So today's topic is on resume writing. And, first off, why are we even talking about this? Why resume writing? When we think of a job search, a resume is obviously a big part of it, but why are resumes important? I'm going to open that. I'm going to ask that to everybody attending here. Why do we bother with resumes? What are they important? Or why are they important? Yeah, go ahead.
Let employers know our skills and education.
To let employers know your skills and education. Absolutely. Yep. Anyone else? Why are resumes important? See if I can get the chat here. Yeah, go ahead.
The resume represents the person.
Yes, your resume does represent you. It is exactly. It is sort of an inventory of your skills, your experience, your education. We'll go into that a little bit more. Absolutely. Anyone else? Thoughts on why is it important to have a resume? So, chat here. To see if you align with the position that an employer is seeking. Yep, absolutely. A resume is the first chance that an employer has to evaluate you, right? That is most likely going to be your first impression on an employer. So we can see that's our first bullet point here. So you want to make sure that you stand out, right? This is your first impression. It's also a way kind of related to show interest in a company, right? If you can tailor your education, your skills, your experience to what the company needs, that's going to make you a stronger candidate. And we will go into that a little bit more. It's a way to showcase your skills and experience, as you mentioned. But primarily, it's to get you an interview, right? When we think about the job search process, it's a process. For the most part, you are generally not going to be able to just give an employer your resume and then immediately get a job offer. Except in maybe a very, very few cases, that's just the start of the process. So while the resume is a first impression, ultimately, you're submitting a resume in order to get an interview. It's at that interview that you can go more in depth about your skills, your experience, and your motivations for applying to the company. So as you're creating a resume and sort of going through this process, keep that in mind, right? That is the end goal. You're building a good resume to make a good first impression and to ultimately move on to the next step in the process, which is usually an interview. So we mentioned this is the first impression. How long would you say that employers or recruiters or HR people, how long do they look at a resume? We've got three options here. What are your guesses? How long do employers usually look at a resume? Yeah, go ahead.
15 to 20 seconds.
All right, you think 15, 20 seconds? Okay. Anyone else? Any other guesses? 5 seconds, 30 seconds. Okay. Other guesses? 30 to 45 seconds. Okay. Yeah, all good guesses. You'll all notice they're pretty short. Now, it does depend on the company, of course. Some may spend longer than others, but on average, that first guess was correct. Employers generally spend about 15 to 20 seconds on a resume. Doesn't sound like a lot of time, and it's not. So again, this is another sort of bottom line here that I want you to take away. As you're building your resume or updating it, you want to be thinking about, okay, what do I need to include on here that will make my resume stand out in 15 to 20 seconds? There are actually studies that have been done where they've had eye tracking software that that recruiters use, and you can see exactly sort of where they look at the resume. So they scan your headline, they scan your skills, they look a little bit at your experience, jump down to education. So what do you want to stand out on your resume that will make sure that you get noticed in those 15 to 20 seconds? So yeah, unfortunately, it is shorter rather than longer. All right. So what goes into a resume? We've had a few answers already: skills, experience, education, and those are the big ones. What else might go on a resume? What other information do you want? Yeah. Certifications. Yep. That could go in like training, education. Absolutely. An objective and a summary. Yes. We'll get to that in a minute. Experience. Yes. Work experience, volunteer experience. We'll get into that. Yeah. So this is a very basic unfilled outline of a resume template. As you can see, all those answers were correct. You've got your objectives, your skill summary, your work experience, your education. The way this outline is formatted right now is what we call a chronological resume. Usually for your work experience or education, you would have the most recent work experience or training that you've done going backward. Chronological resumes are the most common type of resume, and personally, I would recommend that you try to build one if you can. There are some other versions as well. There's a functional resume, which is a little more skills based. Sometimes you can do a hybrid combination, but for our purposes today, we're mostly going to be focusing on this chronological one. Now, I heard a lot of good answers for what's on a resume, and they are all correct. However, one of the most important things that we do want to make sure is on the resume is right up at the top, right? Your name and contact information. Seems pretty obvious, right? But I've worked with folks who have changed their phone numbers, made a typo in their email address, so on. And unfortunately, if something like that happens, you could have, you could be the perfect candidate. You could have, exactly the type of work experience that a company's looking for. But if they can't contact you, they're going to move on to the next person. So it is very important that you have your name and contact information up at the top here, and make sure that it is accurate. It is fine to use different phone numbers and emails, but make sure they're accurate. Go ahead.
I had a friend tell me that you're not supposed to put your address on the
Yeah, good question. So the address is optional. I have seen it both ways. I personally prefer to just use city and state. A lot of people may not put their full address just due to privacy reasons. If an employer specifically asks for it, that's one thing, but in general, city, state is fine. Especially if you're building a resume that's going to go on job sites like Indeed or ZipRecruiter or something like that. Yeah, you don't need to put your full address on there just because you don't know who's going to see it. So great question. Yeah, city and state is fine. So kind of starting off. So the first thing you'd see on a resume is an objective or summary statement. A summary being a summary of some of your experience, an objective being kind of what you're looking for. You can have one or the other, or even both. But it's got to be short, right? Maybe only 1 or 2 sentences. You don't necessarily want a paragraph of text that goes into detail on everything, because remember, 15 to 20 seconds, an employer probably won't take the time to read that whole paragraph. Plus, anything that's in your summary will also be reflected other places on your resume as well. So this is just a quick overview of kind of who you are and maybe what you're interested in. So some examples here, certified nursing assistant with 5 years of patient care experience, strong customer service and sales professional, interested in ... Um, since we're here at the Ignite Hub, an IT example, a help desk specialist or tier 1 help desk specialist with experience, supporting government clients, anything like that, right? It doesn't have to be very long, doesn't have to be very detailed. You just want to give the reader, an overview of kind of who you are. You can add your interests on here as well. So, IT help desk specialist with experience supporting, government clients, looking for a cybersecurity role, or, looking for a role with a government contractor, something like that. So pretty straightforward. Doesn't need to be very detailed, just the overview. Any comments or questions on this? All right. The other thing you can sort of include at the top here, and I guess I wouldn't count it as so much as in the statement of the summary, probably up here with your contact information. But what you can also do, if you have a LinkedIn account, you can put the URL up at the top here as well. That's not a bad way to showcase some of your experience. I wouldn't necessarily put other social media handles or anything like that. It's really just LinkedIn. But if you've got one, you can certainly include that URL on the resume. Employers do look at LinkedIn, and because you have limited space on your resume, putting your LinkedIn there, gives you an option to sort of provide more information. The other thing you can include, and this is more for primarily IT folks or maybe people in sort of creative industries, is if you have a portfolio, an online portfolio, you can link a URL up here as well. So for instance, if you're a web designer, right, and you design websites, or a programmer and you have samples of your code, or even a project that you've done, all of those things can be in your portfolio. You're not really going to have space to put that on your resume proper, but you can put it on you can put the URL, and an employer can go in and see examples of your work. So I recommend that as well if you feel like it applies to you. Oh, all right.
Got a question in the chat. Are we using bold letters to highlight anything on the objective / summary?
Yeah, so that's up to you. Sometimes some people like to bold or italicize the entire summary. I think I generally prefer italics, but it's really personal preference. You don't have to. I think and this is more sort of formatting. But you'll usually have a space or two in between the contact information, space, summary, another space, skills. So it will kind of be set apart like that. But if you want to bold or italicize, that's fine. It's really up to you. There's no one perfect way to sort of do a resume. So that is a good question. All right, moving on to skills. What are some examples of skills that maybe you have on your own resume, or that you think can be included on a resume? What would count under this skills section that we're gonna talk about now?
Well, I have
Yeah.
skills in IT,
Okay.
using packet data protector, do tape archives, and tape stores.
Oh, great. Okay. Yep. Absolutely. That's sort of a technical skill. Yeah, that would be a good one. What else? What are some other examples of skills you might want to include? Let me ask it this way. So obviously, things like technical skills, computer skills are great, and that's oftentimes what we think of. What about those what about things like soft skills? Oh, and I see language here as well. Yes, if you speak another language, absolutely. That is definitely something you should include on here. So anyway, it's not just the hard skills. You can also do sort of soft skills as well, right? The difference being hard skills are usually something you learn or you know take schooling or training to learn. Soft skills are things like you know um, customer service, communication skills, organizational skills, things like that, right? You can learn them, you can improve them, but it's a little more it's not quite as defined as some of the hard skills. So there's a lot of different types of skills you can put on here. Languages, certifications potentially in IT or healthcare or what have you. Um, Type different sorts of computer skills. Maybe you have some specific IT skills, like you mentioned. It can also be things like Microsoft Office if you're familiar with that, right? Um, those are all valid. But also things like teamwork, customer service, like I mentioned, being detail oriented. So more of those kind of soft skills. Employers look for those too. So um, if you feel that is relevant to you, go ahead and put them on there. Um, Now, all of us have many, many, many skills. Even if you think you don't, I would challenge you to sort of look a little deeper. And I think that you would find that you probably have more skills than you think you do. But practically that means you're not going to include all of your, every single one of your skills on the resume, right? Um, just because that would take up a lot of space. So you do want to identify, skills that are relevant to the position you're applying for. Easiest way to do that is just look through a job description. If they're asking for specific IT skills and you've got it, go ahead and put them on there. If they talk about a team-based environment where you're working with other people, go ahead and put team player on there. If it's a customer facing position, go ahead and put customer service on there. So choose a few skills that are relevant to the position. Um, there's no hard rule about how many to include. Um, General rule of thumb again would just be kind of what's relevant based on the job description. This is a whole other workshop by itself that we do, transferable skills. But I will say here, transferable skills are skills that you gain from working in one career field or industry that you can transfer and apply to a different one, right? Let's say you're in food service, as a cashier, you're interacting with a lot of customers. Now you want to get into IT and become a help desk specialist. Well, that also involves a lot of customer service, right? So that customer service, those communication skills, that would be an example of a transferable skill. And especially if you are switching careers or maybe trying to start a new career field for the first time, it's important to identify your transferable skills and make sure they're listed on here because that can give you an edge up as you're applying. So we've got a few questions here. We will discuss the covering the workforce gaps. That's a great question. We'll get to that in a little bit. What if you're changing industries? How do you know transferable skills? So you just put them on your resume. You don't necessarily need to indicate that they are transferable. The recruiter or employer should see that. What you do want to make sure is that you and any skills that you sort of list in your at the top of your resume, make sure they're backed up further down, right, in your work experience or your education, right? Show how you use these skills. That's the best way to kind of highlight them. Does that make sense? Comments or questions on some of the skills? Yep, I see Elhen. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, or you could
Go
call
ahead.
me Amy. My question pertaining to that, like as far as language, you said if how you would use your skill. I just wanted to know if you could elaborate more on that. I would think when it comes to language, it would be self-explanatory, but would I have to say what I used it for or what I will be using it for?
So yeah, so when we discuss language, what I was thinking about was, anyone who's bilingual or multilingual, right? You speak multiple languages. You're right. It is pretty self-explanatory. That said, I always say that more detail is better where possible. So, maybe you speak English and Spanish. And maybe you're in a job that requires you to use both languages. If so, great. In your work experience, I would encourage you to make a bullet point that says that interact or help people that speak different languages. If not, that's okay. I would still go ahead and put that up there. Um, it doesn't hurt. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. All right. So moving along to experience, and this is where I think a lot of people focus on when they're building a resume, and rightly so. This is where most of the focus is going to be. Work experience, right? Now, again, primarily when we talk about experience, what comes to mind first is paid work experience. But that's not the only type of experience that counts. We all have our own lives, our own experiences. So it's not just paid work. It can be any number of other things, right? If you're volunteering somewhere, that's gaining experience. If you've done an internship, or something similar, an apprenticeship, that's you get experience and skills from that. Even sort of individual projects, right? And again, this would probably be more for the IT folks or some of the creative folks, but if you've done projects on your own, like maybe you coded a website yourself or something similar, that's experience. Through the process of making that project, you've learned some skills and have shown that you can apply them. So all of this counts as experience, and it's it's important to kind of highlight that on your resume if you feel that it's relevant. How about volunteer experience? Yes, yeah, volunteering is great. I'm a proponent of that, myself. And it really doesn't matter sort of what you do when you're volunteering. We're at the Ignite Hub today, so I'm going to be using a lot of IT examples, but let's say that you are trying to start a career in IT, right? Even if you volunteer, if you're not working now and you're volunteering, even volunteering at, say, a food bank or something like that, still gives you experience. We talked about those transferable skills. You're still going to be interacting with people. You're still going to be demonstrating that you're organized, that you can keep track of details. All of those are good things that you can highlight. The other good thing about volunteering doesn't as much apply to the resume, but it's a good networking opportunity, right? You never know who you're going to meet while you're there. It could be that the volunteer next to you maybe works for an IT company that you're interested in, and maybe they can help you out. So volunteering is great. It can certainly lead to a job. The question here is, how much weight does a volunteer experience hold, or does it depend on the company you interview with? It may depend on the company. In general, if the skills that you've learned from doing volunteering are relevant to to what you're looking for, that can potentially carry some weight. We will talk a little more about this, but the person who asked about covering the career gaps, if you're not working right now, volunteering is a great way to kind of fill in that gap with with experience, right? Employers are going to see that you're doing something and keeping busy. So that's a good option. I see we have a couple questions around some of these career gaps. So actually, we might just go ahead and address this now. I see a few questions about it. So one question was, taking care of family and things like that. I would say yes. I would say you could use that as experience on your resume, if that's what you've been doing. I'm sure, as most people with children know, that's a full-time job in and of itself, right? There's just so much that goes into that. You are, scheduling appointments, you're taking them to school, you're helping them with homework, you're, you know, meal prep, budgeting, you know, there's a lot of skills, right, that apply to raising and taking care of a family. So, you know, I would say that's okay. That said, you know, I never recommend putting personal information into a resume, right? So if you do want to go that route and put some of that personal experience in, you don't necessarily need to say that it's your family that you're taking care of, right? You could give yourself a title of, you know, childcare provider, right? Maybe it's your kids, maybe it's someone else's kids. It doesn't matter. You have those same responsibilities and skills. So, you know, that's probably how I would put that in there. Does that make sense? I'm gonna try to move this chat so everyone can see it. House manager, in-home manager. Yeah, that's another option you could do, sure. Now, okay, I see another question here. So, PTA work experience. If you don't mind, could you give me a little more information on sort of what feedback you've gotten, like what sort of negative feedback you've gotten on that, if you're comfortable sharing it, of course.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Just like when I've been at interviews and then I bring up the PTA work, they kind of turn their heads and like look away for a minute and then look back after I've described, like, I'm the PTA president at my school. It's the second time I've been the PTA president. I know, you know, how to do specific things, how to run people, and I mean, not run people, but you know what I mean. Like, I know how to run projects and deal with budgets, things of that nature.
Yeah.
So, and it's just until you go into explaining it, they just kind of almost look away. So, and I've been to like a few interviews like that. So that's about it. Yeah.
I understand. So, yeah, I mean, it may depend on the company. That said, just from my perspective as a coach, you know, you mentioned you're the PTA president. There's a lot of work that goes into doing that, right? You're managing all different kinds of people with a lot of competing interests. You have to be organized. You have to be good at communicating. You know, maybe you run the meetings. You know, there are a lot of those transferable skills sort of in doing that role. I think to your point, you know, you said once you start explaining it, then, you know, then it kind of gets a little better. So just, yeah, I mean, I guess that would be my advice, you know, just try to focus it, you know, okay, I'm the PTA president and here's what I do. You know, just have a few talking points that you can hit, you know, that really show that sort of why that's valuable. I don't think there's any reason, you know, not to put that on a resume necessarily. So, because again, you get a lot of good skills and experience from doing something like that, and you're in a leadership position, right? That's, you know, that also looks good. Does that answer your question? So, I personally would say
Yeah,
sure.
that answers it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I personally would say sure, you can keep putting it on there. That said, if it really does seem like that's holding you back, you know, you could try not putting it on there and see if you get a better response. But just, you know, from what you've said, I think you could keep it on there. Oh, right. Yes, Parent Teacher Association. Yes, when I refer to PTA, that's what we're talking about. So other general guidelines around experience. Rule of thumb, try to go back 10 years if you can. You may have 10 years of experience, you may not. But, you know, generally no more than 10 years. You know, there may be a couple exceptions to that, but generally that's the time frame you want to look at. Where possible, you want to show results, right? It's not just sort of talking about what you did, it's about what you accomplished. You know, you could say that you know, worked as a help desk specialist, resolving IT tickets and upgrading computer systems. Okay, that's your job duties, and that's okay. But if we tried to attach numbers to that, to quantify it, to really show what, you know, sort of show the impact of your work, you know, you were a help desk person who resolved 50 tickets, a week, resolving different IT problems. And maybe you upgraded, 100 computers in your, in the department, right? That gives it a little more punch, a little more impact than just sort of, listing out the job duty, right? So where possible, you want to try to attach your sort of results and accomplishments to your, as part of your descriptions on there. You want to use action words as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Oh, there was a question. Keep your description short, no full sentences. You don't say, I provided, medical care to patients. It would be, provided medical care to patients. You always want to start with that verb, I guess. So just keep, no I, me, my, anything like that. Don't make up experience. Again, seems pretty straightforward, but I have had that happen. I've worked with some people who've brought a resume, and unfortunately, the experience they had listed was not something they actually did. Don't do that. As I mentioned before, the purpose of a resume is to get an interview, and if you get an interview sort of with a lot of fake experience on your resume, that's going to get caught pretty quickly, and that's going to harm your chances. So don't sort of put experience on there that you don't have. That said, don't sell yourself short either. I'll give you an example. I was working with an individual a while back, and she was I think a third grade math teacher or something like that. And then we were putting a resume together, and I asked her, okay, so you were a third grade math teacher. Tell me what you did. And she said, well, I taught, basic math functions, addition, subtraction, whatever, to to third grade students. Like, okay, great. What else? And she said, oh, that was it. I was just a teacher, I taught math, that was it. And while that's correct, that was, in that case, she was selling herself short. There's so much more that goes into being a teacher, right? You have to maintain discipline in the classroom. You have to grade papers. You have to, come up with homework assignments, tests, quizzes. You have to communicate with parents. You have to, do meetings and professional development and interface with with school administration. There's a lot of paperwork. There's so much more that goes into being a teacher, right? In this case. So, make sure that you sort of take a hard look at your experience and really give yourself credit for everything you do, even if it seems routine or minor, because it may seem like that to you. An employer may really value it. So there is a balance there. Let's see. I think there was a question. Let me address some of these. Okay, military service. Yeah, you could include that on your resume. Certainly a lot of those skills would still be relevant. I think it is worth including on there just because, I tend to think that always looks good. Some companies may have specific positions or programs that recruit veterans specifically. So I would include that on there, even if you don't have a full list of what you did, in the course of your work. I would indicate that it's on there somewhere. So, okay, next question. So you struggle with noting your results because you haven't been keeping track of them. So my biggest suggestion for sort of keeping track of accomplishments and things like that is basically updating your resume or at least keeping some sort of file somewhere where you write down your accomplishments as you do them. A lot of times when we think about the job search and updating a resume, it's often when we are, basically looking for work, right? If I've been in a job for a while, I'm not really thinking about keeping my resume updated. I'm only going to think about it once I need to find a new job. I think it's a little more effective even if you're working, even if you have no plans to leave or make a change, keep your resume updated. That is a great way to kind of, keep your accomplishments, write them out, list them in one place. And that way you've got them, if you do have to use your resume. So just, keeping your resume updated as much as you can is my big suggestion. But if you also have a Word document or a notebook or something where you can write them down as well as you do them, that's also a good practice. And I would try to get into that, just so you can look back and see what see what you've done. Because a lot of times it can be easy to forget some of our accomplishments. All right, another question. You have experience from overseas in a very specialized area. And your references for overseas. Yeah, I do get that question a lot. Overseas experience from outside the US is still experience. If you were a doctor or a nurse or an IT specialist, overseas, chances are a lot of those same skills are going to be applicable here. Sure, you may need to do some additional licensing or certifications in those fields, but the skills and experience are still relevant. So I would say I would say you could include those. Yeah. Yeah, that is all valid experience. The last point here is watch out for jargon. So jargon is language or vocabulary that is specific to one career field, and that people, that people outside may not, and other people sort of looking in from the outside may not understand it. A lot of times we might think about like the military, for instance, having a lot of jargon, right, and acronyms. And people who aren't in the military may not understand what all that means. Not just the military, it does happen in every field. If you're in IT, there's going to be all sorts of specialized terminology that you're going to know, and someone else may not. So you want to watch out for that. You want to spell things out or simplify things as much as you can on your resume, just because, while you may be applying for a high-level IT position, the hiring manager, the recruiter, may not be an IT professional themselves. They may not understand exactly what it is that you're saying, right? So you want to make your description sort of accessible to a wide audience where possible. Now, if you're applying for a specific company and they use the jargon in the job description and things like that, yeah, then it's okay. But for the most part, you want to make sure that you pretend that someone who has no idea what you do, put yourself in their shoes and see if your resume would make sense to them. A good way to check this is to have a family member or a friend read over it or a career coach and let you know if they sort of understand what what your experience is and to make sure that you're getting it across effectively. Any other sort of comments or questions on experience here? These are all great questions. Thank you. So just as an example here, we mentioned sort of, doing effective job descriptions. Just have a couple examples here. Got a few pairs. So, which ones of these are better, right? You could put a bullet point as, used cash register, or is it better to say process customer payments using point of sale system? Probably the second one, right? It's a lot more detailed. Did CPR training, right? Completed CPR training through the American Red Cross. Again, that second one, it's got more details. It sounds a little more professional. Did you lead an IT support team, or did you supervise a team of 5 IT support technicians attaining 100% ticket resolution? Right, probably the second one. And for this point, for this last one, you see how we attached, some numbers here and showed, sort of an improvement. So you want to be pretty detailed as you're writing your job descriptions. Can Uber drivers count as job experience? Sure. You've got to again, it's all about that customer service. You've got to get people from point A to point B pretty quickly. You need to presumably maintain your vehicle or handle any issues that come up. So sure, you could include that. Yeah. Same with like the DoorDash or things like that too. That would be fine. And I mentioned putting action words in here, right? Starting out with those verbs. So rather than saying did XYZ or responsible for, whoops, I'm sorry, did XYZ, used XYZ, was responsible for XYZ. You want to give your words a little more impact, right? Things like managed, performed, calculated, created, oversaw, communicated, monitored, trained, right? Try to vary it up a little bit. But you want to putting in action words is sort of the best way to give your resume a little more impact, and help yourself stand out. Oh, good question. The question here is, isn't CPR viewed as jargon as well? Yeah, technically it is. CPR is technically jargon, right? It stands for cardiopulmonary resuscitation, if I'm not mistaken. That said, CPR, I feel personally at least, is pretty common knowledge. If you say CPR, chances are most people are going to know what you are talking about. It's kind of like, if you worked for the FBI, right, on your resume, if I say I worked for the FBI, most people are going to know what that involves. Yes, it's jargon. I'm not saying I worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but it's like that. I think CPR and sort of more common acronyms like that, I think are pretty well known. So I think if you put CPR there, you're probably okay. All right, so we covered work experience. The other sort of important part on here is education and training. So again, we're looking at this pretty broadly. It's not just schools or degree programs. You do want to, if you do have a college, university degree, or high school diploma, you want to include that on here. Generally, you want to put your highest degree on the resume. You can include other degrees as well. If you have a bachelor's degree in computer science and a master's degree in computer science, you could probably just stick with the master's degree. If you have a bachelor's degree in, let's say, information systems management and a master's degree in cybersecurity, yes, the master's degree is higher, but the two degrees are, do cover sort of different topics, right? Different majors, different specializations. So you could include them. You could include both. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about putting your degree date in, because I got my undergraduate degree in 1992.
Yeah.
Concerned about ageism.
Mhm.
Is it a good idea to put the date in? Or?
So good question. Yeah. Good question. So generally speaking, you don't necessarily need to put the date in. If your degree or training is the most recent thing that you've done, maybe you're a current student or you've recently graduated, and your education or training is your sort of most recent experience, then yes, I would include it. However, if your experience and training was, a little while back, which is fine, you don't necessarily need to include the date. The other time when I would include a date is if you basically have a gap in your experience because you went to school or did training. In that case, I would include the date as well, just because that sort of covers that gap in your resume. But no, generally speaking, you don't need to do that for exactly that reason. Yeah.
I have another question. I got my undergraduate in economics.
Yep.
In 1992, and then I went to Montgomery College and got a computer programming certificate in 1999.
Okay.
And then I went to UMGC and got a IT master's in IT database system virtualization in 2022.
Okay.
So
Great.
all three of them in.
Yeah, I think you could put all three of them in. What did you say the certificate was in?
Computer programming from Montgomery College.
Okay. Yeah, if the certificate was different enough from your master's program, if it covered sort of slightly different material, then yeah, I would say you could put all of that in. Yep, absolutely. Another thing you can do with degrees is, sometimes you may not have experience in a specific discipline, but you've taken a class in it, right? To use another IT example, something like programming, right? Maybe you don't have experience using Python to program something, but maybe you took a class, right? Advanced Python, fundamentals or something like that. You can if you would like, you can list some of your relevant classes or coursework along with your degree. I wouldn't list every class you've taken. A lot of them may not be relevant to what you're looking for, but if you've taken a class in something that's relevant to the position you're looking at, then you could include it on your resume as well. Yeah.
I'm trying to get a certification in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity information systems certified professional.
Yep. CISSP. Yeah. Yep. If you want to go into cybersecurity, that's a very good one to have. Yep. So I would say so. I think there was a question here. Yes, and actually, Anthony, good question. So the other thing is, if you're currently in school or in a training program and you haven't finished it yet, I would also include the degree, the date that you expect to complete the degree. So you're at Montgomery College now, you expect to graduate, in 2027. Go ahead and put 2027 as your sort of expected date of graduation. Yeah, good question. Moving on to the certifications, and this question is relevant here. Do you think things like Coursera are beneficial? So for those of you who don't know, Coursera is a online training platform. They have both free and paid courses in any number of subjects. I think that will be one of our upcoming workshops, actually, is some of those online resources. But yes, short answer, yes. If you do training or certifications through any of these online platforms, I think it's fine if you put those on your resume, especially if it's relevant to the position you're going for. And again, I'm using a lot of IT examples, I know, but if you take a Intro to Python course through Coursera, you've learned Python, right? You've got those fundamentals, you can apply them. Put that on your resume so that employers can see that you have that experience. Again, with the certifications, date is optional depending on when you took it. If it's more recent, I'd probably put the date on there. And yeah, it can definitely include online training as well. So certifications would be things like, CompTIA, A+, Network Plus, Security Plus for the IT folks. It could be a registered nurse or a certified nursing assistant for healthcare folks. It could be a food safety handler, ServSafe, certification for hospitality or food service. Every industry generally has some kind of certification that you can get, and you can include them all. You can include them on here. Comments, questions on sort of the education and training piece?
I have one for
Yeah.
you. How are you handling certifications different from training certificates? Or do you recommend a different handling?
Yeah, it depends on how you want to format it. Under your sort of education and training heading, you could have a subsection that's called certifications and list things under there if you want. Is that kind of, or are you asking certifications versus like taking a class and having a certificate of completion? Okay, I understand. Okay, so the question would be, what if you've taken a class and you don't get certified, but you have a certificate of completion? That's fine. Again, if the class you took is relevant and equips you with skills and knowledge, maybe experience, go ahead and put that on there. You can put the name of the class. If you want to include, certificate of completion, that's fine. But yeah, I would probably call it certificate of completion versus certified or certification, just because certifications generally mean you passed an exam to become certified. But non-certification classes are fine to put on there too if it's relevant. Yeah. Any other questions or comments on education? Or getting to the end here. So, while skills, experience, education are probably the are very important on your resume, there are some other things you can put on here too, if it's relevant. You can include memberships with different organizations, if if that applies to you. Maybe you're the president of a community organization, or you're the member of some sort of IT club, whatever it may be. That shows you're involved, and can show that you have certain skills and experience. Again, I mentioned sort of not as much personal information. So it depends. It sort of depends on what you feel is relevant, depending on your memberships. Volunteer activities we talked about, they're always good. I would definitely include that. Depends on how you want to format it. You could have a separate section on your resume that's called volunteer experience. You could also just put it under your general experience section, and your title would be volunteer. And actually, on that note, if you do have volunteer as an entry in your experience, give yourself a title, right? Let's say you do data entry at a local food bank, like I mentioned before. Your title shouldn't just be volunteer, right? It needs to be a little more descriptive than that. You want to give call yourself data entry volunteer, administrative volunteer, something that gives the person looking at your resume an idea of the work of what work you're actually doing.
One question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have an amateur radio extra class license. It's not related to my work, but it does show like I have a technical skill. That's like a full resume.
If you feel it's relevant, sure. And you're right. I mean, that does sort of show technical skill. So yeah, I don't see why not. Any recommendations for volunteer experience? Do you mean like, do I have specific places where that I can recommend where you volunteer, or just recommendations for including it on your resume? Because really, it really depends on sort of what you're interested in and what you're passionate about. You can't really go wrong volunteering for an organization that kind of aligns with that. I don't know if that answered your question.
Cool.
Sure.
What about letters of recommendation from your previous supervisors?
Not on your resume. I would definitely keep those letters of recommendation. You may even submit them along with the resume, depending on the application process. But you don't need to list references on your resume. Used to be that was a little more common. You don't do that so much anymore. Yep. Honor societies, yes, and actually, thank you for bringing that up. That could go under education and training as well, or other relevant information, either one. Yes, if you're in an honor society, I would include that on here, certainly. One thing with honor society is you probably do want to give a little bit of a description of what the honor society is, right? Is just because some may have different names and it's not immediately apparent as to what sort of what it takes to be in that honor society. So if it's you're in an honor society because you have a 4.0 GPA for the last 2 years or something, make sure to include that as a description, so that people realize what the work you had to put in to do it. Same with awards, right? If you get awards, you can have a separate award section on your resume. You can also include it as relevant under training and education or work experience as a bullet point if you want. It's up to you. But I would definitely highlight any awards. And again, just make sure that you describe the award so people know what you did to get there, right? Saying that I earned the Montgomery College Student Award is great, but that doesn't really tell anybody what I did to earn it, right? So just add a little bit of a description there. Projects as well. We mentioned having a URL at the beginning. Depending on the types of projects you have, you can you can give a brief description of the project on your resume as well, if you have space, and that's fine. You can even include a link to that. And same with publications. If you have any sort of publications, you can put those on there as well. I think there were a couple of things here in the chat. Oh, okay. Yep. Spy Museum, Library of Congress. Yeah, a lot of places to volunteer in this sort of the DC area. Yep. But if you include on the resume, that's exactly right, Amy. You basically put it just like work experience. Yep. Questions or comments on some of this other information, sort of extra information? All right. We did start talking about filling the gaps. Basically, you want to, if you have a gap on your resume, you want to try to show as much as possible that you've been doing something during that gap. It may be related to your chosen field, it may not. You want to try to show that you've been doing something. So volunteering, taking care of family, we kind of talked about that. School or training, especially online training, can be a good way to kind of to fill that, to show that, to sort of fill that gap on your resume. Any more sort of questions on this? Because I do get questions on sort of filling the gaps a lot. All right. So wrapping up here, I know we're almost at the end of our time. Just to review some general guidelines, you want your resume to have a professional appearance. No headshots or graphics or things like that. A lot of times those are just distracting, unless you're in a very specific field, right? If you're trying to get an acting job, yeah, you might include a headshot. Otherwise, probably not. So keep it professional. You do want it 100% error-free, right? Recruiters get a lot of resumes, maybe thousands of resumes, depending on the company. They have 15 to 20 seconds to go through them all. They're looking for any reason to eliminate people, right? So spelling mistakes and things like that are as good a reason as any to eliminate someone. So make sure that your resume is error-free. You can use spell check if you're typing it up. I recommend getting someone else to look it over to see if they can spot mistakes. Make sure it's error-free. You don't want your resume, so rule of thumb, your resume shouldn't be more than 2 pages in length. I've heard 1 page as well. I think 2 is fine. But really try to keep it to 2 pages. Just because, again, 15 to 20 seconds, any longer than that, and employers aren't really gonna see everything that you have to offer. There are some exceptions. The federal government, I think, allows up to 5 pages or more. But again, generally speaking, try to keep it at no more than 2 pages. 1 page is great if you can make that happen. So a couple questions here. Yeah. So the COVID, right? The pandemic job loss. Do you have to explain that? Not necessarily. I think I do think that if employers see gaps between 2020 and 22, 23, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't know that you need to include that. You don't necessarily need to explain that. Next question is it likely that a recruiter is non-human? Short answer is yes. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We'll get back to that. Good question. And then, is applying for jobs with a cover letter still necessary, or a follow-up email and letter? So a lot of jobs may not require that you have a cover letter. And sometimes they may allow you to do one, but it's optional. I don't think it's a bad thing to have. If you do get the chance to submit a cover letter and you have the time to do it, I would say, yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt your chances. It just shows that little bit of extra, a little bit of extra interest. So I would say, yeah, where possible, try to submit a cover letter. Same with follow-up email or letter. Yeah, I would always try to encourage following up after you've applied somewhere. Easier said than done. A lot of big companies, may not give a direct point of contact to HR or things like that. But if you can, email is probably the best way to go. I suppose you could do a regular letter. I have heard of people doing that in the past. It just takes longer to get there, and if they're trying to move quickly to fill the position, you know, you want to try to get a message to them as soon as possible. Calling or going in person can also potentially work, depending on the company. If you're applying for a store, you know, a local store, you might be able to go in and talk to a manager or call them up. If you're applying to, you know, a big company somewhere, you know, you may not be able to just walk in walk in their building and be able to talk to someone. But yeah, where possible, I would definitely try to follow up. So just some other things. We mentioned no sort of pronouns, I, me, my. That shouldn't be, you know, that shouldn't be part of your description. Start with those action words. Watch your past and present tense. Any experience that you've had in the past should be in past tense. Anything you're doing presently, present tense. Try not to repeat yourself. Again, that kind of goes back to the action words. Try to vary it up a little bit. You know, you don't want 5 bullets to just say responsible for, responsible for, responsible for. You know, try to differentiate it a little bit. And try not to repeat yourself as much. You know, you may have a few jobs or experiences on your resume that are pretty similar. You know, maybe you worked as an IT specialist in a couple of different companies doing kind of the same thing, and that's okay. You know, that's all good experience. But try to vary up the descriptions a little bit so it doesn't look like you've just kind of done the exact same thing in 2 places. There probably are some differences that you can highlight. Keep it one style throughout as far as font and formatting and bold, italics. You know, make whatever style you choose, keep it consistent. Don't include references. We talked about that. You should have references. You can even have a list of them. It doesn't have to go on your resume. You can submit those later. And don't include personal information or pictures. I mentioned this, but I do want to sort of touch on the personal information here. Sometimes people do, you know, on resumes try to fill gaps by saying, you know, I had a medical issue, or, you know, I had kids, or something like that to kind of fill the gap. And you know, if that's what happened, that's fine. I wouldn't necessarily include that resume or that information on your resume, just because it's not any of the employer's business. You know, you don't want them to think, oh, this person was sick for a while, it would be a risk to hire them, or oh, they have kids, maybe maybe scheduling will be a problem, right? You know, you don't want to give them any sort of personal reasons to try to take you out of the candidate pool. So, you know, any sort of personal information about yourself isn't really any of their business, and certainly no social security number or anything like that. That would not be on your resume. Comments or questions on these guidelines here? All right.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
When I left my job last month, they had me sign a form saying that my supervisor could give a reference for me, that he's saying I worked there at a certain time. Is that a good idea or not?
To sign the form?
Yeah, so you can tell what like your work performance. Is that a good idea?
I suppose. I mean, if you think your supervisor will say good things about you, then sure. Yeah. I don't think there's anything wrong with your supervisor verifying your work experience, and they would have to talk to someone. A new company would have to talk to would most likely talk to your old company anyway to, again, verify your experience. So obviously I haven't seen the specific form, but just from what you've said, yeah, it sounds like that's probably okay. All right. Coming up on the end here. So here's kind of where we get back to that, the AI question. So again, just tailoring your resume, try to make sure your resume reflects the requirements in the job description. That's going to give you the best chance of moving forward, right? Aligning what you bring to the table with what they're looking for as closely as possible. So you do want to try to identify and include keywords from the job description. And that's kind of where this AI thing comes in. So the question someone asked was, what's the likelihood of your resume being seen by a human? Most companies nowadays, or at least most large ones, use what's called ATS software. Stands for Applicant Tracking System. It's automated software that analyzes resumes. And what that software does is it kind of scans through for keywords, right? And based on the content of your resume, it gives it a score. Higher scores move on, you know. So yes, I'd say it's a pretty high likelihood, you know, that for at least some of the jobs you're applying for, AI is going to see it first, or this ATS software. Doesn't happen in all cases. There are some companies that still say, you know, we we use humans to review these. It all depends on the company, but you do want to be cognizant of this. And the best way to kind of work within this system is to make sure you have those keywords from the job descriptions. That doesn't mean necessarily copying word for word or cutting and pasting from the job description and sticking it in your resume. That you do that too much, and that's going to come across like you're, basically making it up, right? But try to get those keywords as closely as possible. I have heard, people come up with different tricks and things like, putting keywords, turning the font white, and minimize putting them in small letters on the resume to flag the system. From what I understand, that doesn't really work. That is visible on the back end, so if you get caught doing that, it looks like you're kind of gaming the system a little bit, which you are. So I wouldn't try to do any sort of little tricks like that. The software is more sophisticated now, I would say. Now, this ATS system does seem like a black box, right? It's very hard to see kind of what's going on the other end. Fortunately, there is a tool that can help. You will be getting a copy of this presentation, so it'll be here. But there's a website called JobScan, and basically what JobScan does, it's free, at least for a few resumes. You can put your resume into the website, and I think they ask for a job description as well. And it actually goes through and shows you what your score would be, in relation to a job description. And it can show you where you need to fix things or change things or so on. It is free, at least for a few resumes. But that is a good tool that can kind of give you an idea of, how your resume might hold up against some of these ATS systems. So I, recommend giving that a try. Not the only website that does that, but that's a pretty good one. Any comments or questions on this? I know, the AI thing is definitely a trend. But there are ways to kind of work within that system. Comments, questions? Okay. Oh, Amy. Okay, I see you have your hand up. Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, pertaining to the AI, because I went to another workshop and they were actually, just to summarize it, they were saying that we could, as job seekers ourselves, just to make things easier if we're not good with writing, that we could use AI systems ourselves, which I'm definitely, I was kind of taken back. I was against that, but that was just their recommendation. If you're not a good writer, maybe you can utilize an AI system yourself. But I would be thinking that like the ATS would be able to track that this was written by another artificial intelligence system. I would think so. Does that even work to upload it to an AI writing system, for example?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, that was all. Thank you.
So great question. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That is the other half of this sort of AI discussion. Yes. So can you use, as a job seeker, can you use AI yourself on your own resume? I would say the answer is yes. Things like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, some of those. I think that's fine. I've seen one or two companies, I think, that specifically say, we want this in your own words, don't use AI. But, generally that's not really a disclaimer or a warning that I generally see for job application, for job application. So unless it says otherwise, I would say you're probably good to use that. But AI, ChatGPT isn't perfect. It does it can make things up sometimes, right? So if you do create a resume using ChatGPT, make sure you review it and have someone else review it, right? You want to make sure that all the experience, all the education, all the job responsibilities and things are things that you've actually done, right? It's not enough just to say, ChatGPT, tailor this resume for this job and then submit it. You want to make sure that it actually does reflect you. I can't really speak to the software, flagging AI. I don't. It may, but I haven't really heard much about that. If you are worried, you could take what the AI gives you and maybe change up the wording a little bit. But I think in general you should be okay to use AI. Just make sure that the output you get, the final resume, make sure to review it and that it sounds like you and it's reflective of things that you have done. Yeah, that is a great question. All right. We sort of talked about this already, but the question before about how do you keep track of all your accomplishments and things like that. While a resume that you submit should be no more than 2 pages, having just a master resume, just for yourself, where you keep track of everything, can be very helpful. This is not one that's sent to employers. There's no page limit. It's just a list of everything that you've done. Include everything on there. It doesn't, you don't really need to worry too much about how it sounds. You can always tailor it later. Having a master resume can be used as a basis to create specific resumes for future use, that you can add and take details out of. The important thing is just to keep it updated so that you already have a foundation, right, for building a resume when you need it. So yeah, basically I would recommend creating a master resume or some kind of file where you do track all of this so that you do have it in the future. And with that, that's all I've got for my presentation today. Thank you so much. Are there any other comments or questions as we wrap up here? Thank you all so much for coming. I'm just going to need 2 more minutes of your time. On their screen, there is a QR code. It's for a link to a survey. It is anonymous, so please give your honest feedback. We use the feedback to improve our offerings in the future. So we would definitely appreciate you taking a minute to fill this out. And while you're doing that, I also want to say, as I mentioned before at the beginning of our presentation, my name is Chris. I'm a career coach. I work for Career Catchers, and we are partnered with the Ignite Hub here at Montgomery College. I will be coming back in April and May to give some more career workshops in this series. But in addition to the workshops, I'm also available to provide one-on-one career coaching for anyone who's interested. So if you're looking for a job or training, especially in the IT field, let me know. I'd be happy to to set up a time to talk with you. We can meet virtually or in person. You'll be getting my my contact information and a link to to reach out to me in the follow-up email. And I'd be more than happy to to meet with you. And so my role includes working on resumes, assisting with job applications, doing interview prep. If you're looking for some kind of training, we can talk about how to make that happen. So supporting all the parts that go into finding a job. So if you are interested in that, please feel free to reach out. I can, in fact, what I'll do is I'll put my direct email in the chat here. Please feel free to email me and we can set something up. If you go on the Ignite Hub website as well, that's what, ignitehubmc.org, I think. ignitehubmc.com. Thank you, Anthony. There's one of the tabs at the top, I think it's services, maybe programs. You'll see career coaching, and there's a link to schedule a session with me. You can schedule it through there or reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to meet with you if that is something that you would find helpful. In fact, what I will even do, if everyone is done with the QR code, I will quickly just pull up that website real fast and show you how to get there. Let me go back to the screen share here. This is the Ignite Hub website. As you can see, there's all sorts of upcoming events. We've got the rest of our career workshop series over the next couple months, but there's also a number of other events as well. Fireside chats, lunch and learn series, IT career pathways, digital marketing, yep, and coding boot camps, yeah. So a lot of good resources through the Ignite Hub for those interested in IT. But if you go up here to programs, go down to career coaching, you can make an appointment. Now the appointments through the website are pretty limited. So if everything is full, just email me either at my direct email or through this link here. We can set something up. Any questions on that? All right. Well, that's it. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for all of your wonderful questions and contributions as well. We look forward to seeing you at the next session in April.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Chris, would you have a chance to look over my resume? Are you busy?
1 second.